Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 38 of the Memorial Memo KSR's Kentucky Women's Basketball Podcast. Today, I'm joined by SEC Networks Noah Frary. And now, here's a little secret about Noah. It's one of those things where we're getting into Big Blue Madness. We're like, is it a secret? Not a secret? We don't know. I've gotten the green light to say it, so we're going to say it. Noah is actually going to be calling Big Blue Madness. He'll be there at Rep Arena. It's gonna be super exciting. The football season has been kind of dreadful. We wish, obviously you wish it weren't. You wish, football's doing great, but it's basketball season right now. Noah, how the heck are you, man? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, longtime listener. I've enjoyed this show for quite some time. So glad to make my Memorial Memo debut and talk some Kentucky basketball.
Yeah. So just before we dive in, because you're going to be around UK a lot now. When we'll get into it, you called UK Louisville last year. Just kind of introduce yourself to BBN, to people who don't know you. We're going to see your face around a lot more, which is a great thing because I love your work. Just familiarize yourself with BBN. Tell us who you are, how you got here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words there, but I started my play-by-play career back in 2021. I moved to Greenville, South Carolina, and since then, I've really been all over the southeast part of the country, working for different conferences and schools. Last year, I spent the year up in Lynchburg, Virginia, doing some work at Liberty University, as well as coming over to Lexington quite a few times last year. And me and my wife just kind of fell in love with the area. And, normally in this industry, it doesn't always work that way, that you love the area and then the work follows. At this point, it did. And so a big opportunity to come over here and be around this brand. I have always been a massive college basketball fan. And it's one of those sports that if you were to ask me, what is my long-term goal, that I would like to be calling for ESPN or a network. And I have found myself in these first couple of months living in Lexington, kind of pinching myself a little bit, realizing that I get to be around Big Blue Nation, the brand that is Kentucky basketball, because this is one of the bluest of blue bloods, and it's this fan base is different. I learned that very quickly since I got here. And you mentioned my first kind of taste of Kentucky basketball on the women's side was Kentucky versus Louisville, a sold-out game, the first ranked win of the Kenny Brooks era last year. And ever since that day, I've wanted to be a part of it. Now I am, and excited to be here in Lexington and to be around Kentucky basketball moving forward.
Well, let's get into that UK Louisville game, because me and you met at that game. We met before that game started. And unbeknownst to me, at the time, that was your first introduction to BBN and the craziness of Big Blue Nation, right? Just talk about that night and what that experience was like for you, calling that game.
Yeah, I mean, it was different from the get-go. I remember, anytime you're trying to build a career, much like you are, at times you kind of just have to sit back and realize what you've accomplished, being a part of that and the history that I think that, if I remember right, that was the 60th meeting between those two programs. You don't get a chance to call a lot of those round number games in such a storied rivalry. And I remember just sitting courtside right before we went on camera and that game tipped off, and kind of just looking around and realizing that, hey, there's 6,000 people in here to watch Kentucky women's basketball. Obviously, that arena had just been newly renovated and, is still to this day probably one of the better, women's sports facilities in the country. And so, being grateful in that opportunity, and then the game absolutely delivered. I mean, so much in my industry, you take time to prepare for moments, and you thought maybe Kenny Brooks and this Kentucky team was ready to break that streak that had lasted so long. And then it delivered. And, the third quarter was electric. I remember them tying it late in the fourth quarter. And then, at some point you start to feel like you're a part of a movie as you go to overtime, and that team kind of took over and then would win. And, I remember the last call of that game for me was Big Blue Nation's waited a long time for this one. And they had, and it was nice for them to get the monkey off their back, because they've been waiting so long on the women's side to beat that Louisville team, to accomplish that. And then obviously that was a big part of the catalyst that led to what was an excellent first year for Kenny Brooks and this Kentucky women's basketball team.
That was really kind of the game where we kind of learned like, okay, this team's got some guts. Like this team can go out and perform. Like I remember sitting there last year, because early in non-conference play, you're beating up on Wofford and Northern Kentucky. And then you get to that Louisville game. I think that was, because you're so used to that Louisville game being played December. That was November 16th game.
Yeah.
And then you just remember seeing like we were down for a lot of that game.
Yeah.
And then kind of fought back and scraped our way into overtime. Amelia Hassett came up clutch with some free throws. Georgia Amore things. Turned the ball over like 10 times. But
yeah, it was rough early on in that game, but they were able to turn that around in the second half. And I dubbed Georgia the General in that game, and that was kind of her coming out party, I think, for Big Blue Nation, and was kind of a foretelling of the season that she would ultimately go on to have in her lone year in the blue and white. For sure. Now one of the big appeals for having you on the podcast, other than you're just a great guy and you're awesome to talk to, of course, you called games here at UK. You're going to be calling Madness, and kind of as a result of that, you've been in and out of the Joe Kraft Center. Let's just say a time or two this offseason. Yeah,
maybe a bit more so than me, right? So for our listeners, it's good to have you on just to get some practice intel, right? Just to kind of see like what's going on for the team as we gear up for Madness, Blue, White, and then the season. Now, you mentioned it already. Excuse me. You've spent some time calling games for Liberty. And, of course, Asia Boone was at Liberty. And you've also called Conference USA games in general. I know you called some of Josie's games at WKU.
Yep.
So just out of curiosity, what did you make of them, back then watching Josie Gilvin and Asia Boone at WKU and Liberty? And what do you make of them now here at Kentucky?
Yeah, it was kind of funny, when I knew I'd be coming over here, and then you start, paying attention to the transfer portal, and you begin to hear rumors that Asia Boone was thinking about heading to Lexington and joining this team. And then I remember, similar conversations about Josie Gilvin. And, the first thought on my mind was, oh, great, I now have this security blanket because I've seen these two play. Asia specifically, I've gotten to see play for the last couple of years. And I think one of the things that the Big Blue Nation's going to love about Asia Boone is she's going to have one of the best three-point shots out on the floor. She's a sharpshooter from downtown, a pretty left-handed shot that she can get up in a hurry, and I think she's going to make a major impact on this team. I think she's going to, play a role where, she gets a lot of minutes at the guard position. And I say guard kind of generally because I think you'll see her maybe a little bit at the point guard position. You're going to see her, playing that two guard, but she's the type of player that can fill it up in a hurry. And then you talk about Josie Gilvin. This is probably one of the more electric players in Conference USA. A year ago, I had a chance to, sit and watch her drop 30, where she put in 9 threes on a night. And, early on last year, she had a triple-double. I think where she's going to endear herself very quickly to Big Blue Nation is she is a fantastic defender. This is a player that I'm not afraid to say could easily be the best on-ball defender that Kentucky has on this year's team. She can create a lot of chaos, and this team can get up and down. So if Josie can create those steals, I think we're going to see a lot of high-octane action in Memorial this year.
I think it's such an interesting dynamic with Asia specifically because, and it's like you said, at Liberty, she spent a lot of time playing that two-guard spot. And now here at Kentucky, she's kind of being asked like, hey, let's get you some minutes in a point guard. What do you think that adjustment has been like for her, just kind of watching Asia, like, obviously it sounds like she's handling it fairly well, but do you think it's going to really impact her much at all? Or do you think, you're still going to get, the Asia Boone we know and love?
Well, we can all make fun of, Pat Kelsey calling Louisville point guard U, but the one thing we can say about Kenny Brooks is he is the point guard whisperer. And, obviously Tony Morgan's going to get the lion's share of the minutes at the point guard position. But, what's interesting, and as I think back about Asia Boone's career, she has always been a really dynamic two guard, but there were actually stretches of her freshman year at Liberty where she spent some time at the point guard position. And one of the things that I noticed is when she was in that position on the ball, she was a little bit more assertive. When you move her off the ball, obviously she's reliant on her teammates a little bit more. So I think if she finds herself playing minutes at the point guard position, it could further unlock her game. Just being around her a little bit this summer, she's definitely showing an increased maturity level. I think she's gelled really well with this team. So I think Big Blue Nation's going to be really excited to watch Asia Boone play. I don't think it's fair to compare her to what Deja Lawrence did last year. I think that would be an unfair comparison, just given all the seasoning that Deja had in her career. But Asia Boone is going to be a really nice piece for this team.
Speaking of Deja, and I'm kind of glad you brought this up, because before she took off overseas for her, to get her pro career started, she was still, sticking around in Lexington around the team. One of the things I heard was, hey, she's really helped out. Trying to think, Asia Boone in this period of adjustment. I mean that's pretty cool, right? I mean, to see like this guard who was a great scorer kind of played the role that Asia's used to playing. Now it's going overseas to be a pro. Stuck around and was like, hey, I'll help you out, make that adjustment, while I'm here.
Yeah, and I think even broader than that, one of the things that I've heard from the newcomers is just how the players on the team last year went out of their way to graft them into this family. We hear Kenny Brooks rather talk about the family environment around this team. And, in the time that I've gotten to spend around them this year, I can definitely echo every bit of that. This is a very close-knit team. That's not just a talking point in the preseason, but I think this is a team that legitimately enjoys playing for each other. They enjoy rooting for each other, and it made, the transition for, Asia and Josie. You think of Caitlin KK Carroll, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit in this, and Tony. I think it made that transition a lot easier for those players because of the culture that is around Kentucky women's basketball.
I'm glad you brought up Tony, because that's who we're hitting on next. We're going to kind of hit on every player going down the line, but I wanted to go transfers first, right? Tony, there's obviously the big storyline of like, all right, Georgia Amoor's gone. What do you do? And I think Kenny said it. I don't remember if it was in a press conference or a radio appearance or what, but I think Kenny put it best where it's like, it's not about Tony Morgan filling Georgia Amoor's shoes. It's about her bringing her own. What have you seen from Tony Morgan this offseason that give you confidence, like, all right, she can run the table here at point guard and be just fine?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very talented point guard. She's different than Georgia Amoor. One of the things that I has stood out to me, and it might have even been you, I believe you interviewed her, a couple weeks back, but, one of the answers that she gave to a question you asked was, who do you model your game after? And her answer was, I don't really model my game after anyone. I want to be the best Tony Morgan. And, in that moment, to someone on the outside looking in, that might feel a bit cliche, let's be honest. But as you get to know Tony Morgan, you realize that that's how she thinks. And she is a very talented guard who puts a lot of time into her game. Again, she's going to be different than Georgia Amoor. She maybe doesn't have the three-point shot that Georgia Amoor has, but she more than makes up with it with her lateral quickness, her ability to get downhill. And, I think the word that I use is she has the ability to splinter a defense because of her driving ability. So I think this is a different looking point guard than Georgia Amoor was a year ago. But this is going to be a player that's going to take a big step forward. And that's also discounting the fact that she's grown a ton since she got to Lexington, working alongside, Kenny Brooks and this staff. I think she has, got a better understanding of the game and even is growing in her leadership from that position, because the way Kenny Brooks coaches the point guard position is much different than most programs. So I think Tony is due for a breakout year and could very easily be an all SEC piece.
Kind of go into that a little bit, or as much as you can anyway. You talk about how Kenny kind of coaches, and specifically coaches point guards a little different than other coaches. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously see when you're around the program that he's constantly watching what they're doing. He was a point guard himself. He's paying attention to it. He cares about the details. And I don't think every coach is that way. I think that's one of the things I've come to appreciate in spending time around Coach Brooks is he really does care about all of these little details. And, even in the midst of practice, when things aren't going well, it's, hey, let's stop. Let's talk to Tony. And then you automatically see her implement some of those things. So, and last year we saw, many times where Georgia would just go to the sideline and have a conversation. And, I think you're going to continue to see that. That's the type of coach that Kenny Brooks is. And that's a big reason why I believe Tony Morgan chose to be here in Lexington, because ultimately she has dreams of playing at the next level. And, you don't have to look very far to see what a Kenny Brooks coach point guard can do at the next level.
I'm glad you brought up being coached differently, and I'm glad I asked, because I haven't been in other facilities as much, but I bet, something I bet that's different. Seems like every time I walk in there and I'm watching a Tony Morgan drill, it's like every assistant coach, every practice player is guarding her at once. I asked her about it when I interviewed her. I was like, is that not like kick your ass? Are you okay? She's like, yeah, it's making me a better player though. But yeah, the work and development that they put into their point guards, and even like their bigs like Claire Strack, Liz Kitley at Tech, like it's very like intentional, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And, they pay attention to, minute details for these players and shots and, how they're responding during certain actions on the court. And, I even think at times there's adjustments that get made to the plan based on the personnel that they have. So, again, the more times that you're around this coaching staff, you really realize that they care about the details. And obviously this staff has proven that they can win games here at Kentucky, at Virginia Tech. And you have to imagine that their goal would be to, ultimately get to the top of the mountain in NCAA women's basketball.
And then you also think about Jordan Obi and Dom Perova, who,
yeah.
To us, we know them because we cover the team. We've been we think about them. But like at a national level, people aren't thinking about those two. Just, how about those two? What have you seen from them this offseason that you like?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And, as I've been around the team and watched, them practice and get ready for this season, and then you look at the outside noise, which they're not paying attention to in the building, but you see people saying, hey, they could be the most disappointing team in the SEC, or, hey, they're a borderline top 25 team. And I think a big reason for that is people have forgotten that heading into last year, Jordan Obi and Dom Perova were penciled in to be potential starters. More so, I think Jordan and Dom was going to play a massive role last year before both of them went down with injury. So I think a lot of people nationally who have not been around this program are kind of forgetting about those two pieces. And I don't think it's a stretch to say at some point this year, both of them could be starters on this team. Ultimately, both working back from injury. I think they're healthy. That's the goal, at least heading into the season. And I'm not afraid to say, I've asked some people around the building about the talent level of this Kentucky roster, and people have been very open to say that they think this is the most talented roster in the last decade for Kentucky women's basketball. I think this team could be more talented than last year's team. There is a lot of really good players on this team, and I think Jordan Obi and Dom are only going to increase the depth on this team and will factor in massively as this season progresses.
And then on top of that, you think about the triplets, right? Amelia Hassett, Tiani Key, Claire Strack. We learned recently that Hassett and Key are still growing. Like, I mean, you think they're tall kids already, and then like, oh, never mind, they're going to be 7 foot tall one day, I guess, Just how much do you think the staff is leaning on those three specifically this season, both from, production, but also, leadership wise?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, I mentioned as we came on air just about Big Blue Nation being different. I have never been around a fan base that actively is paying attention to when inches are changed on the roster online. I think that's one of the things that makes this fan base unique. But, speaking of the triplets, I do believe that they're going to be leaned on extremely heavily from a leadership perspective. I think that's been evident, leading up to this year. I don't think people are talking enough about, the lost leadership of how much Georgia and how much Deja filled that role. And not that the leadership is any worse this year. It's just that's a lot of leadership to fill. Those were players that had played a ton of college basketball. But from what I've seen, I think, Amelia Hassett, they call her Millie around the building, and, Tiani Key and Clara Strack are more than ready to step into that role. Obviously, Tiani and Amelia are playing in their final season of college basketball, and, both could be WNBA prospects if the season goes well for them. Clara Strack, we all know the talent there. I think she can take another step forward. So I do think they're going to be leaned on very heavily from a leadership perspective and ultimately on the court. If Kentucky, wants to accomplish their biggest goals this year, those three are going to have to play a major role, and I think they're up for the task.
When you ask, around the team, and you're like, all right, who's the leader of this team, right? Because you think about Tony Morgan, and typically your point guard is probably going to be your leader more often than not. She kind of shows her leadership more so through her actions than words, right? She's not the most vocal of leaders. Now, I've kind of heard slightly different about Tiani. I heard they're kind of trying to push her, be like, hey, we want you to be the loudest voice in the room. Could you say the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're pushing all of those players that you just mentioned to be leaders. You've even seen, a lot of times in college basketball nowadays where coaches have gone away from team captains. And I'm not saying that that's what Kentucky's doing, but they're relying on people to step up and fill their roles. And I think that's been, the message all year long. At times throughout the year, Tony's going to need to lead. Millie's going to need to lead. Tiani Key's going to need to step up in a big game where Clara Strack maybe is in some foul trouble and vice versa for Clara. So I think you're going to see a mixture of all of that. This is a very veteran roster. I mean, at the end of the day, you have Caitlin Carroll, who comes in as a true freshman. You've got Elsa Vadfors, another freshman. But this is a pretty veteran team who's played a lot of college basketball. And I think they're going to lean on a lot of these older pieces to help, catapult this team forward this season.
And then you can't forget about Lexi Blue either, right? I mean, from what I've heard, she's just oozing confidence at this point. Like, it seems like, from year one to year two, it's basically just night and day kind of difference in her day-to-day, level of confidence, like I was saying.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I didn't know Lexi last year from what I saw of her, watching some games and even being up close before that Louisville game. Lexi was a player who was still trying to figure out the speed of college basketball and, the lifestyle of college basketball. I get the sense, having been around her a little bit more this summer, that she's really settled in nicely. This is a extremely intelligent player, extremely intelligent person. She does really well in the classroom as well. And you can clearly see increased strength and playmaking ability. So I think Lexi Blue could take a really nice step forward this year for Kentucky. And I think that would be, big for a team that ultimately has to replace really good shooters like Georgia Amore and Deja Lawrence.
I was talking to someone, and the quote they gave me, or maybe not verbatim, but something along the lines they said was like, you can really kind of start to see why she was a top 40 recruit, right? Like, you can kind of start to see, maybe I'm not saying she's going to be, averaging 35 minutes a game and all of a sudden, like, most improved player in the country. But, like, you're starting to get a sense of, like, okay, she's super talented. And now she always knew she was talented, but, like, now she knows she can give to this team. Like, I imagine, even her teammates, like, just kind of seeing how Lexi, again, I keep saying confident, but I mean, that's the word, right? Like, just seeing how much more confident she feels. Like, I imagine that's got to rub off on your teammates too, right?
Yeah, and I think it has. When you see her approaching her game the way that she does, I think that rubs off. I mean, her and Asia Boone, we talked about Asia Boone earlier, have become very close since, Asia got to Kentucky, and you see those two feed off of each other. And, I think that goes without saying across the roster. This is one of the most talented players that, Kentucky has brought in from a recruiting standpoint in a couple of years. And I think that, the projectables have always been there. She looks the part. And now that she has confidence in her game and, maybe has that SEC strength that you need to play in this league, I think Lexi Blue could easily take a step forward for Kentucky.
And then lastly, as far as players specifically go, Kentucky's got two freshmen. You named dropped them earlier, Caitlin Carroll, KK, and then Elsa Vadfors. Sounds like both have shown flashes of potential, especially KK, but they still have, sounds like they still have some ways to go, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, ultimately, it's a new era of college basketball, and to see freshmen step in and have big-time impacts is becoming a little bit rare in this day and age with, the transfer portal and other such things. But I think particularly Caitlin Carroll, they call her KK around the building, could find a nice little role on this team. I think, the one thing that has stood out to me very quickly when it comes to Caitlin Carroll is her offensive ability. This is a really talented offensive player. Her ability to stretch the floor from three, I think, is going to be something that kind of very quickly endears her to, Kentucky women's basketball fans. And, I think one of the things that's going to be intriguing this year is I think a number of the bigs. I mean, you talk of Tiani and Clara and, Caitlin, I think you will see increased 3-point output from the bigs this year, which could, make some things pretty exciting. Ultimately, you and I were talking before we even went on air today, and This is a brand of basketball that's fun to watch. There was a reason that there were so many people at Memorial. Kenny Brooks has said that many a times, that he wants to have a brand of basketball that is entertaining. He feels like that's what the women's game needs. And I think with all of these pieces and their unique skill sets, you're going to see a very entertaining brand of basketball this year inside Memorial.
I think and I say we as in Big Blue Nation, we got and I'm going to bring up, it feels like as Kentucky fans, we can't stop talking about John Calipari. But I bring up John Calipari because, you think about the recruiting classes he brought in, like top 5 kids, top 10, top 20, whatever. And just the style he did, like he played those freshmen, right? They started. I feel like we as Kentucky fans get so hung on the fact, okay, we're bringing this top 40 kid, top 15 kid. Oh, they got to be a starter, right? They just have to be. But it's like you said, like, well, now, especially in women's basketball, like you rely on experience so much, right? Like at the same time, yes, Caitlin Carroll can be a big contributor in year one, and there's no reason she can't be. But at the same time, like this isn't Calipari, and this is, it's men's and women's basketball or basketball, but like it's a different sport in the sense like you got to really rely on experience, and you're starting to see that in the men's game too more though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, since I came here and have been around these programs a little bit more, like I'm on Tyron Stokes' watch right now, hoping that the number 1 recruit in the nation ends up playing for Kentucky. And,
I think we all are, yeah.
Caleb Holt and some of these guys, like nothing gets you more excited than recruiting. Now, I'll be honest, as a broadcaster, I don't pay attention to that much. I care about once they're there, but it does make it entertaining. But I think Kentucky is beginning to recruit at a higher level. I'm sure you're going to ask me about, some of the pieces that are coming moving forward. But I think sometimes it's unfair to expect freshmen to step in. I mean, I've talked to a number of people, around the country. I get to talk to a bunch of coaches, and that transition from high school to college is a big deal, particularly going from high school to even the SEC. It's a different style of basketball. There's a lot going on there to adjust to, but fortunately you're in a position where you're Kentucky that if you miss on some of those pieces, you have the ability to reload through the transfer portal. Not that I'm saying there's been any misses, but you have the ability to bring in and attract talent in multiple different ways simply because of the brand that is Kentucky basketball.
It wasn't necessarily on the agenda today, but let's talk newcomers, right? Like, let's talk some future cats a little bit. Savvy Swords, Madden Greenway, your 226 commits. According to our On3 rankings, 2 top 10 kids, or I guess Rivals rankings now since the company's merged. Super talented kids, right? And you think about Savvy, like Michigan, where Sila plays, UCLA, South Carolina, all in the finalists. And then you have Madden, the Iowa legacy, right? Duke in there, like a great school. Just, you talked about Kentucky recruiting at such a great level now. I mean, how is it they're doing this all of a sudden? Like, I'd say all of a sudden, and the answer is probably just Kenny, but like where does this come from? Because I don't even know if he had that level of recruiting at Virginia Tech.
No, and he didn't, and he'd be the first to tell you that. I mean, I had someone check the other day for me. So Caitlin Carroll is the highest ranked recruit that Kenny Brooks has ever had on his team that he recruited. And as you start to look forward, you mentioned some of those names, obviously top 10 prospects. And, Kenny Brooks and his staff, they built a reputation for being able to develop players. You saw that with Georgia Amore. This is a player who is, shooting on a wooden basket in Ballarat, Australia, that they were able to turn into, a multi-time All-American. I think Liz Kitley was, a similar type of conversation, and there are others. So I think what's unique is moving forward, because of the brand that is Kentucky basketball, and I'm lumping in the men. I think that helps Kentucky women's basketball because people realize the investment that Kentucky is willing to make into the sport of basketball. And yes, that plays out on the men's side, but I also think that has created a curiosity on the women's side that has put them in conversations with better players. And now you go out and sign, what should be 2 top 10 prospects in next year's class. I think that starts to set you up really well for the future. And I've had the thought, okay, Kenny Brooks did all of this. He went to a Final Four. He won ACC championships without top-ranked players. What can Kenny Brooks and this staff do as they start to bring in top talent, both as, freshmen and transfers? I think the sky's the limit for Kentucky women's basketball.
Just kind of looking at next year's team, because I mean, this is what we do at Kentucky, right? We're so crazy. We can't just focus on the season ahead. We gotta think down the line. You have senior Clara Strack, and then those top 10 kids, Lexi Blue, Kaylin Carroll, all these kids, and you're gonna get some transfers that we don't even know yet. The potential, like, as someone would say, the ceiling is the roof, right? Like the potential, like what can he do here? Like, are we talking national title?
I mean, I think that's their goal. I mean, I think their first goal would be to win an SEC championship. I think that Kentucky women's basketball believes that they should be hosting every year. I think they believe that they should be a top 4 or better seed, getting that double bye in the SEC tournament. The investment is being made into this team. The talent is there. And, I think moving forward, this is going to be a team that should be a perennial top 15 team or better. And if you look back at what Kenny Brooks has done at previous stops, there is no reason to believe that a Kenny Brooks coach team with even more talent than he's probably ever had in the past could not get to a Final Four, could not compete for a national championship. I mean, those of us who are around college basketball realize that, SEC women's basketball is probably the best league in the country. So if you're in that top 3 to 4 teams in the SEC, there's no reason to think that then you're not at least in the top 10 nationally or even higher.
And the thing about Kentucky, the women's basketball is, like, obviously the storied history isn't quite what it is on the men's side, right? I mean, there's not hardly any basketball teams either side that has the history the men's team has here. You think about this team has been to 4 Elite Eights. You think about what Kenny's done. I mean, do we realize that, like, if and when Kenny gets to a Final Four, like, when do we build the statue? Like, what are we doing? Like why are we waiting?
I mean, it very easily could get to that. I mean, I think selfishly, as you move to Lexington and you start to be around these programs and understand the history on the men's side better and be around the women, I think, my mind goes to, like, how fun would this town be if both teams were competing for national championships? And, obviously we've heard the men very clearly state that their goal is to finish the assignment and to get national championship number 9. And, I think on the women's side, that would be a goal. I'm not saying that's the goal this year. I don't see why they couldn't be in the conversation to get to that point of the season. But if both of these teams are able to start firing on all cylinders with the support of Big Blue Nation, with the support of, Mitch Barnhart and the Kentucky Athletic Department, I think you could see a golden era, per se, of Kentucky basketball here over the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, kind of talk about Mitch Barnhart and the admin. Now, don't go into numbers because someone will call me like, Phoenix, what are you doing? Stop saying that. Now, clearly, we've talked about the $82 million renovation, their own facility, all these different things. Like, it's very clear, and you look at the contract Kenny was given. I don't know if it still is, but at the time he was signed, 3rd highest paid coach in the SEC, 7th in the country, right? Like, there's clearly, like, from an admin perspective, that is the goal with Kenny Brooks, like, be a top 10 program, compete for SEC championships, bar none, right? You look at the admin and what they're putting in, and you even go back to recruiting, like that's huge, right? Like, you think about, and we've talked about this off air time before. I've talked about this with other people, like NC State and UNC are like the only 2 schools I can think of with their own basketball arenas besides Kentucky for women's basketball. Like, people don't realize, like, we give Mitch Barnhart a lot of crap, and maybe some of it deserved, but at the same time, like, dude, he's been at the forefront of this whole women's sports thing. And it's not just women's basketball. I think about volleyball, gymnastics. Like, Kentucky's kicking ass in all those sports.
Yeah, I think you clearly see a commitment from the administration at Kentucky to not just be a men's basketball school, a football school. There is a desire around that program to be good across the board. And on the women's side, you've clearly seen the investment that's being made and would expect to see, greater investment moving forward. So, they are investing in the women's programs. You think of how good volleyball is right now, top 5 in the country. You think of what I believe women's basketball could be. You mentioned, gymnastics, women's soccer's had a great year. They are investing holistically in this athletic department, and it's paying dividends. And, Kentucky is putting themselves in the conversation to be known as one of the more holistic athletic departments. Yes, I know a lot of the conversation right now is about football and, men's basketball, but there is a groundswell movement happening at Kentucky where they are investing in women's sports like few others are, that I think could pay dividends down the road.
And again, don't go into numbers because I'm sure you have some in the back of your head. But like you think of rev share and NIL, like you've heard kind of behind the scenes, like all of Kentucky's coaches, and again, I guess they're going to say this publicly because why wouldn't they? Like they're all pretty pleased with what they've heard. But like I've heard, like even on the women's side, like Kenny's pretty pleased with the resources he has. And again, he isn't here if those resources aren't given to him in this program.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to say it. I think at the end of the day, Kentucky women's basketball has been given everything they need to go out and be one of the best teams in the SEC, to be one of the best teams in the country. Yes, you're right. Every coach is going to want a few more dollars in this era. Let's be honest. But when you look at the renovations and, salaries and, practice facilities and rev share, this athletic department has clearly said, we want to be good in women's basketball. And I think they can be in the future.
And you think about, just the other sports, like they have to above all else, you got to make sure the men's basketball program is the best in the country because that's just what the school is, right? And with football, you want to keep them competitive, right? Like you don't want to just all of a sudden have football be like you're down in the dumps and you're like the worst team ever. So to be able to say, for women's sports, they're still able to put this much into women's sports, it's great. And before we get out here, I want to talk about Big Blue Madness. And like I said, we've already mentioned it. You're going to be calling the SEC, calling Big Blue Madness on the SEC Network Plus. We've discussed this Plus
on the digital side.
There we go. How excited are you to, you experienced Louisville, you've called some UK games, but how excited are you for your first Madness?
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Again, coming here, knowing that I was going to get to be around basketball as someone who's been a fan of basketball and understands the history of this place, an opportunity like that is not something that I take lightly. I found myself, I had to explain to my dad, who really didn't grow up around college athletics at all recently. I was trying to explain what Big Blue Madness was. And the way I described it was that they sold out 20,000 plus tickets. And I believe the number was 29 minutes this year. Yeah. I have never been to a game at Rupp. I've not experienced that place being full and being the Rupp that so many of us know. I've seen it on TV. So I'm just excited to kind of soak it in and to be a part of, an event that, dates back over 40 years, much like it was neat to be a part of the 60th game between Louisville and Kentucky. To be a part of the history that is Big Blue Madness is a career milestone for me, and something that, I'm excited to be a part of. And, I'm excited for the fans to get a chance to see both of these teams, to see the dance team, to see the stunt teams, and to just get ready for what I believe could be a really exciting, period of time here at Kentucky.
I mean, from November to March, and really October to March, or to April, right? To April. This could be a super fun time for both programs. This can be a great time. Don't spoil anything, right? Because we know you're calling Madness. We know you know stuff. Just don't spoil anything because we want to see it for ourselves. But we've heard that this Madness is going to be, quote, bigger and bolder than ever. This is going to be your first one, so I don't know how well you know the history, but you think it's got some legs to it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they're putting a lot of, effort and resources into, creating a great event for these fans. Obviously, you see the passion of Big Blue Nation. And I, know from talking to people around the athletic department, like their goal is to put on a fantastic show for this fan base. And honestly, this fan base deserves it with the amount of, time and effort and passion they bring. So I think that you're going to see a great show. I think we're going to have a ton of fun next Saturday night. I think that's new this year, moving it to Saturday. And, I know they have plans for earlier in the day and different events, really to just celebrate the history of Kentucky men's and women's basketball. So I think for those of Big Blue Nation who gather, to commune together next Saturday night, I think they're going to be very pleased with the event and just excited to see these two teams that, we've talked about for so long during the offseason, and now we're just ready to start to see the rubber meet the road.
There we go. That's got me pumped up. I can feel the blue blood running through my veins right now. There we go. We're going to call that an episode. 40 minutes of Noah, I'm not just saying this because you're on here. I think that was the best episode we've done of this podcast. I mean, genuinely, just from a deep dive perspective, personal stuff. I mean, I feel like this is one heck of an episode. May have to make you a co-host, man.
Well,
we'll see how this goes.
I enjoy it. And, again, from afar, I got to know you last year. I've appreciated the coverage. I know that Kentucky, the fan base appreciates what you're doing. We obviously see how much coverage the men get here in Lexington, and rightfully so. But you're doing something really valuable here. And I'm excited to, watch you grow and watch this show grow. And, hopefully we see Kentucky women's basketball make a deep run this year, and your numbers continue to skyrocket. So appreciate what you do, and excited to, see and perhaps be on the show again in the future.
There we go. Appreciate the heck out of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please subscribe to the KSR YouTube channel. We work our butts off to bring you content like this. If you enjoy it, subscribe, like, comment, subscribe, do all those wonderful things. Phoenix Stevens alongside Noah Frary. Is that it? You got anything to say before we get out of here?
No, I think that's it. I'm, go Big Blue, maybe?
Go Big Blue. How about that? CATS, 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 cats. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been episode 38 of the Memorial Memo, and we will see you guys next time.